Hi there, I'm Steve Jones from Newsmag Renfrew. You know, it wasn't always this way. This punishing heat day after day, 28 degrees Celsius all the way up to 35 degrees Celsius day after day after day after day. It's almost like biblical in proportion. It's that bad. Oppressive, life-altering, dangerous for people and animals alike. You throw in runaway, out-of-control forest fires, which seem to be the norm these days, and what you've got, when you put all of that together, this oppressive heat, smoke particulate in the air, difficulty breathing, difficulty with a whole host of things, you put all this together and you come up with a name for it, that's called summer. That's what our summers have become. And I hate it. I absolutely detest it. Now, I hate to sound like Grampy Steve here. You know how Grandpa used to tell you the stories about how far it was to walk to school and back in a snowstorm, and it was uphill both ways and all that kind of stuff. So I hate to sound kind of like that. But nevertheless, it wasn't always like this. And I'm only 64 years old. And it wasn't all that long ago that summer was much more moderate in nature. I mean, we didn't have this incessant heat all the time. Sure, we had days that the thermometer would pop over 30 degrees and stuff like that, but that was more the exception and not the norm. My recollection of summer, and it wasn't all that long ago, a couple of decades really, is, as I said, something more moderate, something more pleasant, something more balanced. It wasn't heat, followed by thunderstorms and funnel clouds and madness and mayhem. First you've got drought, then you've got flooding. I mean, my goodness, this is crazy. And anybody who doesn't think that this has something to do with climate change has their head stuck firmly in the sand because, friends, I can remember not 10 years ago it being different. And so if we have this degree of climate change within a decade or even 2 decades of our existence, then I'm going to say that we've got ourselves a problem here. We've got ourselves something that could be considered, without being overly dramatic, to be existential in nature. And, you know, sadly, for some people, it already is existential in nature. We live in a time of heat domes and as I said, incessant heat. And as that becomes more and more the norm, more and more of society's most vulnerable people become victimized by it. And that lower strata, or strata, if you will, of people that exist at the bottom of the social standing, they always get hammered by just about any calamity that comes along. So, I mean, we're talking about homeless people or people who make their lives on the streets. And we're talking about, of course, the poor, the abject poor. But we're also talking about people who are of modestly low income status, as well as senior citizens who, by and large, tend to live alone and often exist just on pensions. And these are people who just don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the financial ability to afford something like air conditioning, for example, which can make a huge difference, not only in quality of life, but can make a huge difference in the great struggle between life and death. So it's sadly the case that those people, those disadvantaged people in society, tend to bear the brunt of these weather events more than the rest of us. They're always at the forefront of anything that goes wrong. And sadly, of course, this is no different. They will pay an exponential price for the incessant heat that we all have to deal with, rather. So, there are, of course, plenty of people who are lucky enough to have shelter from the effects of direct sunlight, but these are people that, even though they have a place to live and a roof over their head, without air conditioning and without any mitigating factors to help them duck or avoid the heat, maybe they don't get direct sunlight, but they sit inside their homes, and as the sun pounds away at their homes all day long, these people literally bake inside. Perhaps a strong term, but we have people dying inside their homes, and they're considered to be people who have shelter. And really what they're doing is they're baking in place. So, you know, as I mentioned, we're talking about the homeless, the poor, lower income people, senior citizens. These are people with disabilities that prevent them from moving about and going to malls where there are malls or community centers that are opened up during heat waves to stand as cooling centers. These people that I just mentioned, they have an awful lot of difficulty, A, even knowing about those things and their existence, but B, as well, getting to them to take advantage of any respite that might be on offer from the opening up of a shopping mall or a community center or any place that has ice, like a rink or anything like that. These people find it very difficult to access these sorts of things. So, the issues they have exacerbate any problem that seems to hit society, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's this, that, or the other thing. And it's the same thing with heat waves or climate change that results in long-term chronic heat waves. So, I want to tip my hat. If I had a hat on, I'd tip it. So maybe I'll just give kudos to the government of British Columbia. It was announced just recently by the province's health minister, the Honourable Adrian Dix, that the province was going to pony up $10 million over 3 years, give that money to BC Hydro, and BC Hydro was going to undertake to purchase and install air conditioning units across the province for people who fell into the categories that I've already identified, so that they would be able to get at least some measure of relief from this incessant heat. So, as I mentioned, that's over 3 years, $10 million. So that roughly translates or will translate into the purchase and installation of about 8,000 portable air conditioning units going out the door and into the hands of people who could sorely use them. Now, conservatives would probably see this as another example of liberal, progressive, Marxist, socialist overreach, but they always think like that. They always get up in arms about people who, in their view, receive gifts from the government for no money, people who are not willing to work for the things that the rest of us have, and if they just had the motivation, if they just had the oomph, if they just had the wherewithal to get out there and work as hard as the rest of us, meaning those of us with money, they too would be able to afford the simple things of life like air conditioning. Well, that is a sort of a stereotypical conservative view. I don't know how much money it costs for society to pay for medical interventions for people that are found passed out on the street or people who are found unconscious in their homes, to have them secured and brought to hospital and to be treated in hospital. I have no idea how much that costs, but I bet you it's chicken feed. I bet you it's chump change compared to $10 million over 3 years. So if you break that down, that's about $3.3 million a year. So I would think that health-related interventions that result in health stays by affected people, it wouldn't take very long to get to the $3.3 million level, to be sure. So now we've got these portable air conditioning units being installed, and so now we have lower income people or senior citizens who before didn't have access to this kind of thing, now will. And that's a life changer for anyone lucky enough to get one of those air conditioners. Now, look, if conservatives want to blind themselves as they often do with their self-serving rhetoric, that's fine. But honestly, those are the people that really can't be trusted to reach out and help other people who are in need, in most cases through no fault of their own, and in some cases as a result of direct policy decisions made by rich people in the first place. So for any conservative that wants to get too up and bothered about all of this stuff and helping these people with what is basically a life and death situation, well, all I can say is shut up and go lie down, because I don't have really much time for you. Last year in British Columbia, they had what was called a heat dome, which to me was a relatively new climate term, but basically it was this mass of hot air that just stuck over the province of British Columbia, and there was nothing that could move this. There were no winds. There was nothing of a natural nature that could cause this thing to move or to dissipate. And so that air, this hot, humid air, just stuck, as in being a dome, over the province of British Columbia. And so I think that was last year. And if it was, whenever it was either last year or the year before, I know this as a fact, that the BC Ministry of Health has identified no fewer than 619 people who died from that event, from heat-related illness. The vast majority of those were low-income people and seniors, seniors being defined as people over the age of 60. Fully 98% of these people died indoors, which is a sobering statistic. And of those people that died indoors, over half of them died alone. Listen, the actions of the province of British Columbia and the actions of the party that governs there, that party is the BC Liberal Party, not to be confused with the National Liberal Party. The BC Liberal Party styles itself as being sort of a center-right political party. Nevertheless, despite any ideological problems that they may have with helping others out, they stepped up. They ponied up $10 million. That's 8,000 air conditioners, and I'm going to give them credit for that. Is it enough to solve the problem? Of course not. But it's the proverbial step in the right direction. So this is an example of government at work for the people. Government isn't here to make corporations richer and wealthier. It's not here to make rich people wealthier, although sometimes that seems to be the unintended effect. Government is supposed to be all about servicing the people of the province or the people of the nation. We are a family, and the government sort of, now this isn't the greatest example or the greatest way to describe this, I'm sure, but this is government, how did Abraham Lincoln put that? Rather than every man for himself, this is government of the people, more importantly, for the people, and government by the people. And those were Abraham Lincoln's words at the Gettysburg Address, and I believe in them wholeheartedly. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Republicans today are usually associated with the right wing of the political spectrum, not a crowd of people in 2023 who are terribly interested in helping out those who are less privileged than they are. But you know what? There's more of us than there are of them. And so, as long as it remains one person, one vote, then we can just pretty much, ignore them. And as I said before, tell them to go lie down. $10 million, $10 million is what the government of British Columbia is putting forward for this. As I said, it's going to result in 8,000 air conditioners. Okay, well, that's great. It's an awful lot of money, sure, but I think it's a great investment. You're going to spend that money, you're going to spend that taxpayer money one way or the other, either by being proactive with the air conditioners or reactive by picking up bodies and rushing them to the hospital and all the attendant costs that go with that. So for the price of one first-line center on the Vancouver Canucks, and I'm talking about Elias Pettersson, who makes $10.3 million a year and loses over half the face-offs that he takes, the government of British Columbia is going to invest in the people of the province by providing them life-saving, mitigating equipment that will be all the difference between, for many of these people, life and death. So, as I said before, this is not the end of the problem. And nor is it the beginning of the end. But if I can borrow, something that Winston Churchill said in the Second World War, perhaps it's the end of the beginning. The $10.3 million perhaps as a first go, maybe that could be followed up by additional supplementary funds that enhance and improve the coverage of air conditioning and other mitigating things that will help people from the effects of excessive, long-term, and chronic heating or heat in the environment. Not only in British Columbia, but right across the country as a whole. For Newsmag Renfrew, I'm Steve Jones.